It's really a pleasure to be welcoming back to the store Thomas Frank. He's spoken here for nearly all his previous 6 books. One of the first ones, of course, was What's the Matter with Kansas in 2004, which became a kind of cultural touchstone in exploring why so many working class and poor white Americans in the heartland had taken to voting for a Republican Party that actually championed policies of more value to the rich than to them. And after a couple of other books and a little more than a decade later, Tom came out with Listen Liberal, which took to task those on the other side of the political divide, the Democrats and self-described progressives. Through these works and Tom's many other pieces on politics and culture in the United States, he's developed a reputation as one of the most provocative and articulate voices on the left. His PhD in history from the University of Chicago gave him a good grounding early in the past, a good grounding early on about the past. And his ability to write not only with insight and passion, but often humor has made him both entertaining and very enlightening to read. Over the years, Tom has found several prominent journalistic outlets for his views as the founding editor of the Baffler, as a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and for Harper's, and more recently as a regular contributor for The Guardian. Anyone familiar with Tom's work knows how troubled he's been by what he sees essentially as the unraveling of American society. His latest book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, is a collection of his essays that originally appeared in various publications over the past 7 years. Not much has escaped his incisive, skewering commentary, as you're about to hear. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Thomas Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Howdy, folks. So whatever was the matter with Kansas is a lot worse today, and the liberals didn't listen. I know, it's funny. It's not funny, actually. It's not funny. It's there goes the Titanic. So this is a book of essays, and published between 2011 and earlier this year, and they range all over the map. There's some about architecture. I've got one of my favorites is about I tried to write a history of the McMansion. Where does it come from? How did it change stylistically over the years? This sort of thing. It's in there. I've got a bunch about academia, some about popular books. There's one about the life of Andrew Breitbart, who in some ways is the John the Baptist for the sort of, how would I put this? The John the Baptist for the sort of awful, there you go, the Antichrist who's now residing down the street. There's one where I interview a lot of striking fast food workers, and one where I visit a whole bunch of presidential museums. I'm very fond of that one. But what I thought I'd talk about tonight is the part of the book that is explicitly political. And as I was reading the essays from that section, I noticed that there's the theme that unites them, you might say, is the travails of centrism. And the first essay I'm going to read from is one that I wrote back in 2013 about the movie Lincoln. Y'all remember this movie? It was based on a book by Doris Kearns Goodwin called Team of Rivals. Okay, it was a huge monster bestseller. And it was an interesting thing about Team of Rivals. It was a bestseller 3 different times. It went on the bestseller list once, then in 2005 when it first came out, then again in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president, then again when the movie Lincoln came out. So I read Team of Rivals and I found it kind of unremarkable. And so I was really curious about the galloping popularity of the book. I mean, it's really mysterious, right? And so what I discovered that in its first ascent, the book was understood and reviewed and described and celebrated as a work of management theory. And or management advice, if you will. And the idea was that Lincoln was supposed to offer all sorts of clues for the, for the literate boss, if you will. And then in its second ascent, the book was thought to be it was celebrated on different grounds. Now it was a book about bipartisanship, as a guidebook, as a sort of a field guide for understanding the new Obama administration in the sort of Lincoln-like way in which Obama invited Hillary Clinton and a number of Republicans into his cabinet. And then stage 3 came, of course, with Spielberg's movie in 2012, the movie Lincoln, which was based on the book. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's about the president's struggle to get the 13th Amendment, the one abolishing slavery, to get the 13th Amendment through the House of Representatives. Okay, now we go to the text. All right. Because suddenly you notice the language becomes much more flowery. And upon beholding the film, the guardians of the Washington Consensus saw the clouds part and the sun shine through. Yet another commonplace had been magnificently reaffirmed, and this time it was the emptiest DC cliche of them all. It's compromise, is how Goodwin summarized the film's message for an interviewer, and the commentariat chimed in unison. Yes, we have learned from this movie, they said, that politicians must make deals, that one must give something in order to get something. The Civil War is, for me, a peculiar place to set such a message. After all, it was compromise. If you remember your high school history, it was compromise that permitted the South's slave empire to grow as large as it did. The Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and so on. And in fact, Abraham Lincoln first rose to national prominence as a highly moralistic opponent of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And the abolitionist movement itself was about 99 parts idealistic grassroots outrage to 1 part Washington machination. And the war itself was, during the Civil War, there was this kind of popular demand for what they used to call unconditional surrender. Remember? Of course, we don't actually remember. None of us were. Unconditional surrender, though, that's what they said. Like Ulysses S. Grant, that's what his initials were for. Unconditional surrender. Not more compromise with the slaveholders. But the movie, if you remember the movie, it actually goes well beyond justifying compromise. It also celebrates corruption. Lincoln and his men, as they are depicted in the movie, don't merely buttonhole and persuade and cajole. They buy votes outright with promises of patronage jobs, and it is strongly suggested with cash bribes. So, in other words, Spielberg has given us this situation where the noblest law possible is put over by the most degraded means. Now, why would a director do something like that? Well, one of the lessons that we're supposed to take from the film is that idealists must learn to lie and to keep their mouths shut at critical moments if they want to be effective. Lobbyists, on the other hand, are a class of people that the movie takes pains to rehabilitate. Spielberg gives us a raffish trio of such men, and they get the legislative job done by throwing money around and buying off loose votes, the usual. And they huddle with Lincoln himself at one point to talk strategy, and then in the climactic scene, Spielberg shows us that a worldly lobbyist, a man of the market, can get her done, while a public servant dithers on about legalisms. Tony Kushner, the playwright who wrote the script for Lincoln, told NPR back in 2013 that the project had allowed him to, quote, look at the Obama years through a Lincoln lens. As in 1865, he said, there is enormous potential now for, quote, rebuilding a real progressive democracy in this country. There are obstacles to this project, however, and among the most notable ones in Kushner's view are those damned idealists, or, as he put it, an impatience on the part of very good, very progressive people with the kind of compromising that you were just mentioning, the kind of horse trading that is necessary. So the idealists were the problem during the Obama years. Now, I found this a little bit strange. If you think back, to the middle of the Bush years, and ever since then, we have been living through a kind of a broad revival of reform sentiment. And what ignited this revival and what has kept this revival going on ever since then is disgust with precisely the sort of workaday Washington horse trading that the makers of this movie chose to celebrate. You think of all the chapters in this saga of outrage that I'm talking about, the soft money. Remember the outrage over soft money in the last decade, the selling of earmarks, the Koch brothers and their galaxy of Washington pressure groups, the Citizens United decision, the power of money over the state. I mean, even Donald Trump has his kind of weirdly refracted version of this, right? What was it? Drain the swamp, he used to say. Now, I myself think that it's healthy that public fury over this stuff has simmered on into the present. I think there's still a lot to be furious about. I mean, the lobbyists may be Democrats, they might be Republicans, but they are pulling the wires for the same interests as always. Many of the people who engineered the deregulation of Wall Street, for example, are still hanging around the halls of power in this city. And one of the, I should say the one really great triumph of the Obama administration, healthcare reform, was flawed from the beginning, thanks to a heavy thumb on the scales placed by the insurance industry and big pharma. Not because of a lack of idealism. Anyhow, so now we have a movie that glorifies Abraham Lincoln as a great compromiser, focusing on the one episode when a dash of corruption worked wonders and everyone lucked out, and the best measure in American history was thereby enacted. While I was watching the movie, though, I couldn't help but think of all the episodes of ordinary Washington venality that the film effectively rationalizes. For example, imagine a movie about I would actually like to see this, a movie about the Washington lobbyists who pushed banking deregulation through back in the centrist years of the 1990s, you know. All the magic elements were there, right? Consensus, bipartisanship, compromise, you know, idealism in surrender, lovable lobbyists dangling pleasures of the flesh before their, before government bureaucrats. I think, 90 minutes glorifying the merry japes of those lovable corruptionists. Now, that's a task for a real auteur. Anyhow, I'd like to see that. I also like to see one about, well, the hell with it. So, okay. I wrote that in 2013. This next one was an essay from 2016 about our hometown newspaper, the Washington Post. And it's the almost unbelievably hostile treatment that it meted out to the outsider presidential candidate Bernie Sanders in its op-ed page in the course of 2016. And I, for this essay, it was originally published in Harper's magazine, I summarized that criticism of Sanders in great detail, and you can read it all right here. It's all here for eternity. And this is how the essay concludes, after I've summarized the many, many, many ways that in which they've gone after Bernie Sanders. By the way, the ratio of stories attacking Sanders to stories supporting him was 5-1 in the period that I examined, which I just thought, it's like, it was just shocking to me as a reader. I'd never seen anything like this before. Okay, so here I summarize all the stories, and then I write as follows. Think of all the grand ideas that flicker in the background of the stories I've just recounted. There is the admiration for consensus, the worship of pragmatism and bipartisanship, the contempt for populist outcry, the repeated equating of dissent with partisan disloyalty. And think of all the bad ideas that this pragmatism engendered. The cheers for the bank bailouts, the indignant refusal to question the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, the dismissal of single-payer health care as a preposterous, iridescent dream. And what I'm describing, of course, is the ideology of the professional class, of our sound-minded East Coast strivers, fresh out of Princeton, fresh out of Harvard, eagerly quoting as authorities their peers in the other professions, whether economists at MIT or analysts at Credit Suisse or political scientists at Brookings. This ideology constantly reassures us that the experts who head up our system of government have everything well under control. Above all, it is an insider's ideology, a way of thinking that comes from a place of economic security and that takes a view of the common people that is distinctly patrician. Now, here's the mystery. Why would journalists of all people buy into such an ideology? As a group, journalists aren't economically secure. I mean, newspapers are museum pieces today. I mean, every bit as much as Bernie Sanders' New Deal policies. The newsroom layoffs never end. Book review editors are so rare a species today that they may disappear completely unless somebody starts breeding them in captivity. The same thing goes for the journalists who once covered police departments and city halls. At some papers, opinion columnists are supposed to have day jobs elsewhere, and copy editors have basically gone the way of the great auk. This is an extinct bird, folks, the great auk. In other words, what I'm saying, no group knows the story of the dying middle class more intimately than do journalists. So why do the people at the very top of this profession identify themselves with the satisfied and the powerful? Why in the world would a person working in a moribund industry compose a salute to the Wall Street bailouts? And they did. This was part in their course of their war on Bernie Sanders. This is part of it. It's like he should never criticize the wall. No one should criticize the TARP, you know. Why would a columnist drop megatons of angry repudiation on Sanders for his, quote, outrageous negativity about the state of the country? I mean, for this country's journalists, that state is pretty goddamn negative, folks. Maybe it's something about journalism itself. I mean, this is a field, after all, that has embraced the forces that are killing it to a pathological degree. I mean, no institution has a greater appetite for trendy internet thinkers than journalism schools. We're all of us are desperately convincing ourselves that we need to become entrepreneurs, right? As newspapers die, it's every man for himself in the digital world. We're all going to become entrepreneurs. We're going to get ourselves somehow attuned to the digital future. The future that is, as it is described for us. Is this being filmed, by the way? So no cursing? Well, go ahead.
Edit it out.
All right, then we'll leave it out. By a transparent, a group of the digital future as it is described for us by a cast of transparent con artists, let's say. When a few years ago, the TV comedian John Oliver did a riff on the tragic decline of newspaper journalism, just about the only group in America that didn't think it was funny was, that's right, the Newspaper Association of America, which didn't think we ought to be nostalgic about the days when its members were successful. Truly, folks, we are like buffalo nuzzling the rifles of our hunters. Or maybe the answer is that the people at the top of the journalism hierarchy simply don't identify with their plummeting peers. Maybe the members of the DC pundit corps think they will never suffer the fate of the people who wrote for the Tampa Tribune. And maybe they're right. As the rising waters inundate the Fourth Estate, it is increasingly obvious that becoming an insider is the only way to hoist yourself above the deluge. And maybe this is one reason why the Washington Post attracted the fancy of mega billionaire Jeff Bezos, and why the Post seems to be thriving these days, with a fancy new office building on K Street and a swelling cohort of young bloggers ravening to be the next George Will or the next Sidney Blumenthal. It remains, this institution remains, however precariously, the cradle of the punditocracy. Now, meanwhile, between journalism's insiders and journalism's outsiders, between the ones who are rising and the ones who are sinking, there is no solidarity at all. Here in the capital city, every pundit and every would-be pundit identifies upward, folks, always upward. We cling to our credentials and our professional class fantasies, hobnobbing with the senators and the governors, trading witticisms with friendly cabinet officials, helping ourselves to the champagne and the lobster at the reception. Everybody wants to know our opinion, we like to think, or to celebrate our birthday, or to find out where we went for cocktails last night after work. Until the day, that is, when you wake up and you learn that the tycoon behind your media concern has changed his mind, and everybody is laid off, and that it was never really about you in the first place. Gone the private office, the award-winning column, the cable news show, the checks start bouncing, the booker at MSNBC stops calling, and suddenly you find that you are a middle-aged maker of paragraphs, of useless things, dumped out into a billionaire's world that has no need for you, doesn't really give a damn about your degree in comparative literature from Brown. You start to think a little differently at that point about universal health care and tuition-free college and Wall Street bailouts. But of course, it's too late by then. Too late for all of us. And then the last thing I'm going to read from is an essay that was published actually this year, but I'm sure you missed it. It was, and that's why we're talking about it again, but it's about, I tried to imagine how Donald Trump might get reelected in 2020. And I go on it in great detail, imagining the different scenarios, how it might happen. Needless to say, of course, it is coming to pass. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that, but it is coming to pass. It is looking worse or better or worse every day, depending on how you think about it. But what the part of the essay that I want to read from this afternoon is about how right-wing populism can be defeated more or less permanently. Because that's what my entire career has been about. I mean, not that anybody gives a damn or listens or cares, but that's what I keep writing about. Donald Trump will never seem like a natural or inevitable president to me, not merely because he is a cad in a shockingly cantilevered ducktail, but because I can't help but feel that right-wing populism is a freakish historical anomaly. Yes, I know it has been running for decades. I've been writing about it myself for 20 years. By its very nature, however, it is a put-on. It is a volatile substance. It is riven with contradictions. It rails against elites while cutting taxes for the rich. It pretends to love the common people while insulting certain people for being a little too common. It worships the working man while steadily worsening his condition. Nor can I reconcile myself to the sort of prosperous, pious liberalism that predominates nowadays, this nice suburban politics that finds it easy to love Google and Goldman, that can be downright contemptuous toward the desperate middle class that liberalism was born to serve. To my eye, the passionless technocrats it has repeatedly chosen as its leaders seem as unnatural as Trump himself. But maybe that's just me, still dazed by what happened on election night in 2016. And we'll talk about that later. But nothing in politics seems right to me anymore. I keep assuming, hell, in truth, it hasn't seemed right to me since the 1980s. Nothing, since I was 15 years old. And I keep assuming that a society plumbing the depths of inequality ought to be a society turning to the left, that a populist moment ought to be a democratic moment, that the natural agent of public discontent ought to be the more liberal of the two parties. And one fine day, I keep telling myself, we will give that old TV set a smack and everything will snap back into focus, and Americans will suddenly and clearly understand what a mountebank Donald Trump is. That in January 2021, they will eject him from the White House in disgrace, a Herbert Hoover, a scowling mistake we will never make again. What might the Democrats do to bring that result about? Well, the first and really the only question facing them has to do with the party's identity. Does it accept the Republicans' invitation to continue on as it's done before, making itself more and more into an expression of professional class disdain? Friend, you know what I mean, a friend to the enlightened financier, careful curator of the Silicon Millennium. Back in 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt set down his understanding of American political history, in which there were two schools of political belief, as he put it, liberals and conservatives, and they fought endlessly throughout history for primacy, these two camps. And regardless of what they were called, or what I should say it was called at any particular moment, Roosevelt wrote, this is the quote, the Liberal Party, and I can always hear his Harvard voice saying this, the Liberal Party believed in the wisdom and efficacy of the will of the great majority of the people, as distinguished from the judgment of a small minority of either education or wealth. So that's how he saw it. The great majority of the people against this tiny minority of money and learning, education and wealth. What Roosevelt could not foresee was a party system in which the divide fell not between the few and the many, but between the small minority of education and the small minority of wealth. How could he have known that his great majority would one day be split in two and offered a choice between enlightened technocrats on the one side and resentful billionaires on the other? Get that great majority back together, I think, and they would be unstoppable. In truth, folks, there's really only one set of successful politics for an age of inequality like this one, and it naturally favors the party of Roosevelt. Trump succeeded by pretending to be the heir of populist past. At the Republican convention, he even stole phrases from Roosevelt, sort of as I do here. But, he Trump acted out this role as a rough-hewn reformer who detested the powerful and truly cared about working class people. And I think now it is the turn of the Democrats to take it back from him. They may have to fire their consultants. They may have to stand up to their donors, and they will certainly have to find the courage to change, to dump the ideology of the 1990s, the catechism of tech, bank, and globe that everyone now knows is nothing but an excuse for an out-of-touch elite. But the time has come. History is calling. Thank you very much, folks. So let's talk about this, and then about this stuff, or whatever you want to talk about. We can talk about McMansions. We can talk about fast food, and then I will autograph books or whatever you want to do. Drink beer, whatever you want. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I was wondering if you see the divide in terms of the fact that before 2000, that's an arbitrary year, or let's say 1990s. Before that time, you had some, moral philosopher. In the 50s and 60s, you had Niebuhr, and you had John Rawls in the 80s and 90s, who I did know, and I'm wondering do you think there's an absence of a moral philosophy which is so developed that can deal with this kind of, what is essentially accelerated, globalized market, everything is commodified, which was not really the case. It was not perceived or construed in that manner.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
That's a really good question. There is an absence, and there is something that, there's a lot of things are wrong, right? And and we can go on and on about all the things that are wrong, but I see what you're getting at. And the way I would put it is this: there are a lot of good thinkers out there, and there are even people that I think can see clearly what is happening to us, but we have professionalized the kind of public philosophy that you're talking about to such a degree that it's been academicized.
Yes, academicized.
Look, I used to be in academia. you can't write. You mentioned Reinhold Niebuhr. You can't write like that and have a job in academia.
No, you can't.
You cannot write for the general public and have a job in academia. That kind of thing is extremely rare now. I'm sorry, go ahead.
As a corollary, if you could just focus in. So what
when I chose to do this,
yeah,
I had to say goodbye to that, and
yes,
they were very clear about that.
So your book does, or what you're saying constitutes that. But who can say it with the communicative gifts that it would require? That is I think that can happen, but who is what I.
All right. Well, that I don't have an answer for that. I don't know who that person is. I suspect they're in France. And they're doing it in French right now, and we're missing it. Yes, ma'am.
That was terrific. And I was here for Kansas, and I was here for Listen Liberal, and it's just a pleasure.
Well, thank you.
Thank listen.
And there's another one in there called The Wrecking Crew. And it's all back, folks. They're back, and they're wrecking with both hands. They're swinging the sledgehammers.
But I think I'm tired of hearing about the elite that doesn't care and only is interested in advancement. I am a charter member of the elite. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. I went to the public schools, Bryn Mawr, Yale Law School, and eventually I got so disgusted I went to medical school.
Hey, that's cool.
Because I was working in the Reagan administration in the Environmental Protection Agency.
Oh, man. So what's his name? Gorsuch's mom.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
She's a charter member of the Wrecking Crew.
I don't understand what happened to my generation, because it didn't happen to me and it didn't happen to my late husband.
Yeah.
I don't understand people like Robert Kuttner. He was here with his book. He's got the economics right. And I said, so Bernie was right? I mean, I think he was talking about single payer or something like that. And he looked angry, and he said, no. And I was at a book party for Bill Galston, and Mark Penn was there. In fact, I think it was his house, very expensive. It isn't even a McMansion, it's a real mansion. And he had done a survey that showed many more Democrats in favor of the Bernie Sanders model than the Clinton model. Yeah. I don't remember the details of the poll.
But wait, Bernie Sanders was is extremely popular right now.
That's right. So I said, because I'm a physician, I said, so Bernie really was right, wasn't he? Mark Penn looks stiff and uncomfortable and says no. I don't understand why they don't see it. And it's not like the people don't know. I mean, every month or so, the Washington Post carries an article about what's going on in West Virginia and how people are dying, and how the jobs have left. There have been 5 books here about all the jobs that have left the Midwest.
Yeah.
And I went to school with Hillary.
How they could miss that?
That's right.
I wake up every day and ask myself that. Well, it's easy when you live in Washington to miss that stuff. I'm from
right
Kansas
here.
City, and but no, this city's doing great. I'm going to give you a kind of travelogue here. So last week I was in Seattle. I've never seen such a boomtown. These sort of golden, glittering cities that are prosperous are like there's never been anything like this moment. But you go out to, so in the book I describe a visit I made to Walt Disney's hometown in Missouri. What was the name of his hometown? Jesus, now I've forgotten. And I went to Marceline, yeah. And I was there for quite a while. I went to the museum and I interviewed a bunch of people in the town. And I went to the towns around there. And this is one of the parts of America that has gone from being, it's Missouri. This is Harry Truman country. This is Stuart Symington. This is Dick Gephardt. This is Democrat. No, these people went for Trump by 80%.
Right.
Not the state, but the part of the state that I was in. And and you go around and you look, and it's not because they've gotten rich. They are going the other way fast, and they can see it. They know it. It's it's in your face every second. Now, what you said that really intrigues me is that it's a generational thing.
It seems to be.
This is so true.
And this is the 60s generation.
I know. I knew that's what you're talking about. Yeah. So I'm from the generation after that. I was a little punk rocker, in the 80s. And we were, and when I started the Baffler magazine in 1988 down in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we were determined to make this kind of stand against what's now called like neoclassical economics. And as I did this, and went out into the world and made this fight, I discovered that I was really on my own back in those days, in the early 90s and stuff like that. There were goddamn few people that had not swallowed the whole supply side thing. I mean, very, very, very few, even Democrats. There was this big moment then when all the Democrats were switching to be Republicans and all that kind of thing.
Right, that was in the South.
And now it's different. Now there are so many people my age and younger who can see like I say, you go to Marceline, Missouri, and you can see the folly of this economic philosophy. It's everywhere. It's just like as plain as the nose on your face. It is. It's easy to perceive it now. And I wonder what keeps those people, like the people you described, what keeps them from acknowledging it? What keeps them from acknowledging it? And one answer that I keep coming back to, especially when you're talking about the Clintons, is the generational thing. When they threw out the World War II generation, the Roosevelt generation, the New Deal generation, that was their great step on the national stage. If you go back and read those books in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, that's how they understood themselves. They were rising up against their parents. That was their revolution when they threw out the New Dealers. Gary Hart used to talk about this all the time. And I've never heard of anybody that is going to go back on their own generation's revolution. When they triumphed over their parents, they're not going to walk that back, ever. That is who they are as a generation.
We'll talk about it. It's not that simple.
They aren't all guilty, of course. You've got, like you mentioned, Bernie Sanders is part of that group. I have lots of friends from that cohort. My friend Bill Ayers is part of that cohort. Probably shouldn't mention that. Lots of people like that. All right, next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, as a university professor, I'm also part of that elite. I'm also from Seattle, and I can certainly tell you that despite the all that money that's sloshing around, as we saw in the last few weeks with the repeal of the Amazon tax, it doesn't mean that everybody is, getting their fair share by a long shot. We have a terrible homelessness problem.
Oh, I saw it. I photographed it. I've never seen that there before.
It's disgraceful. But I'm torn about what to ask you, because I wanted to ask you about your thinking on folks like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who says the Democrats kind of need to essentially write off the Trump voter and embrace identity politics in a big way, which seems to have worked under the very peculiar circumstances in Alabama in November. But actually, and this is maybe not unrelated, I'd actually rather hear you walk us through your thinking on what's going on the border with family separation and the politics of that, because Trump seems to think on some level, from what I understand, that actually this will eventually play to his benefit with his base. People will be so motivated by him taking a strong stand on the border against the invaders. And what do you think about that?
There is an appetite for cruelty among the conservative leadership, the leadership of the conservative movement, that is distinct, that is there. I've written about this before. I wrote it, and this is in some of my earlier books. It is highly noticeable. Take the career of Ann Coulter, for example. I mean, these people can be incredibly mean. It's a kind of a refusal of compassion that's really remarkable. And I don't really understand Donald Trump. I like to write about how he got elected and everything, but I don't really understand the way the man's brain works. This seems to me like an incredible disaster for him politically. I don't know how someone could make a mistake like that. It's just, yes, there is a lot of cruelty on the right, but no, the general public of this country, by and large, is not yet sadists, I hope. About the other question about identity politics, among the kind of leftists that I have spent my life around, not to say that this is the right answer, the one identity politics that everybody knows is obviously the answer is you get working class people together. That what Roosevelt called the great majority, and it's unstoppable. Including the white racists. The question is, including the white racists. Well, the thing is, I mean, it's hard to say when you throw something out there. You don't, obviously the Democratic Party cannot be a racist party. That is, obviously that is outside that's unacceptable. I know Bill Clinton and the New Democrats used to dabble in that, in doing their own little version of that, and that's loathsome in my opinion. Absolutely disgusting. I described this in some detail in Listen Liberal. So obviously you can't do that. On the other hand, there are issues that have left issues that have overwhelming support just across the board, white, black. We mentioned universal health care, but there's many of them. And, these tend to be obviously working class issues. That seems to me to be the obvious answer and has been ever since the beginning, that if you get these people together, I think about populism a lot these days, and populism, that was their big idea. In the South, we get the white farmers and the black farmers together. This was in the 1890s. It was a very unusual thing to try. And they thought, we get these people together and we'll win, right? There's more of us than there are of them. And they did win. But then the establishment came down on them like a ton of bricks, and that was the end of that. And it was just this, this horrible defeat. But you look at Roosevelt, winning the presidency 4 times, and then Truman a 5th time. There is no question in my mind but what I said before, that the age of inequality ought to be an age of economic populism, of left-wing populism, and it's out there. Bernie Sanders spoke to it. I mean, Trump even spoke to it in a kind of weird, twisted, upside-down, grotesque way. And I am absolutely certain that that's the way to go. That's not to say that there should be no place for identity politics. Obviously there should. It's very necessary in a lot of ways. But you have to, I think that's the identity group that you get a hold of these people, you win. That's American politics. That is the magic formula, and always has been since the very beginning, since Thomas Jefferson. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm from Wamego, Kansas, and right between KU and K-State, and I have degrees from each. My husband is...
Did you know Brownback?
Oh,
he went to both,
I actually worked for the legislature eons ago.
Oh, sorry.
Before he was ag secretary there, so long time ago, 1987. My question is, I've taught public speaking. My husband's a part of the elitist crowd. I mean, the University of Chicago education.
Wait a minute, we're all confessing up to this?
No. I don't feel like that I'm a part of that. I feel like I was raised in central Kansas and went to the public schools. But I've taught in our community colleges. I've taught at K-State. And I teach public speaking when I have taught. And you get paid $1,500 a semester to teach
as
public
an adjunct.
Speaking.
Yes.
As an adjunct.
Yeah, I did that for a while.
And you try to encourage young voices, and even those middle-aged voices that are coming back to actually work on a degree, that their voices matter, and they're apathetic. So in Kansas, we have these zealots who are meeting at I can go to the McAllisters to have a nice sandwich, and I can't have a conversation because there's a group that's convening, and it's all the AFP volunteers. And you go to our legislature, and you see AFP lobbyists on every floor. And
that's Americans for Prosperity, one of the Koch groups, right?
Right. And so I feel like so many of my students have said, you tell us that our voice matters, you tell us how to speak in public, you give us all of these tools and resources, but in reality, why would I even vote? And I've taken informal polls, when I begin the semester, and there are so many people, intelligent people, gifted people, who do not use their voice to vote because they feel like that's something that an elitist does, someone who has that special education. And I'm like, no, your community college education entitles you to use your voice, to use that education.
Absolutely, yes.
It's not just those who, graduate from prestigious schools.
Yeah.
But in Kansas right now, people are either zealots or they're totally apathetic. And our Women for Kansas group, which tries to be a uniting force for compromise, for listening to one another in topics, we get together and we're highly concerned about the primaries. Kansas primaries will be very telling. If Chris Kobach gets elected and makes it in August. And his zealot speaking is what is, it's defining our Kansas.
We should get to the question, though. What do you want me to, what do you want to?
My question is, how do we get people to not be apathetic?
Oh.
How do we encourage people that and lift them up to how do you lift them up?
I feel like the system is doing that itself. There was a surprisingly large amount of apathy in 2016. The two candidates were the least popular candidates we've ever had. And I was just looking at the numbers the other day. The black turnout in a lot of places was way down. Nobody was excited about the Democratic candidate. But damn, people are upset now. They're ready to vote now, and that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. By the way, you touched on something really interesting, that working as an adjunct and getting paid $1,500. This is what is happening to American higher ed. It's a subject of obsessive concern for me, and there's 3 essays in the book about that. And I worked as an adjunct for a while, and this is every PhD in my generation either went through that and then gave up, or else went on and stuck with it. But that so many classes are today taught by adjuncts, even as the price of college goes up, it's absolutely insane. Anyhow, read the book; it's all in there, and I'm glad to hear about Kansas. God, I had something to add to that. Oh. I knew Chris Kobach in high school. Yeah, isn't that incredible? Yeah, he was a debater for Washburn Rural. That's right, and I was a debater for Shawnee Mission East, and we met in combat. Yes.
Before I get to my question, I'll confess I'm an adjunct and I get paid $7,500 a course.
Oh, that's good. That's really
University
good.
of Maryland, College Park.
That's fantastic.
My question is, would you comment on the number of women now that are running for office? Is this a passing fad? Or is this something that is actually going to make long-range changes for politics in America?
Like I said just a second ago, Trump has invigorated. There are so many people running for office, and it's great. People are so excited to stand up against him and do something. There's a real feeling of desperation. On both the right and the left now. So we're all feeling that way, which is a good thing in a civic sense. It's a terrible thing. Just another anecdote that's neither here nor there, that doesn't come close to answering your question. But I will often wake up in the morning and the sun is shining and the birds are singing and the flowers are in bloom, and it's a beautiful day in Washington, D.C. And I'll go outside to the driveway and I'll get the newspaper and it's like, shit. But I think it's all the women running for office, an extremely healthy thing right now. Will it continue? I don't have any idea. I wonder if what I have been saying. It's all driven by Trump, of course, and what I've been saying ever since he defeated all those Republicans in the nomination in 2016, in the early part of 2016, I've been saying the same thing: is even if it's not Trump, Trumpism is here to stay. The Republican Party is never going back from that sort of really ramped up demagoguery. That kind of, there's always been a strain of demagoguery, but it's so much more powerful now, and the fake populism, that's never going away. My great fear at the time was that Trump would lose, and then the next Trump would be someone that actually knew what they were doing, like Ted Cruz. Yeah, or Mike Pence or Marco Rubio. These are guys that actually know how to rule. And you put one of them in the White House with Republicans controlling both houses of Congress, that's bad. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that there's no other way to address the growing income inequality which you spoke of, which is particularly a challenge in the great heartland of the country, unless we can more aggressively retain better paying jobs and create new job opportunities for people who live in those areas, or else we're going to empty out the Missouris and the Wisconsins and Detroit and other places like that. But that's a very tough thing to do.
I wonder.
Single payer health insurance isn't going to do it. Free college tuition isn't going to do it. Bernie had, some very appealing ideas on the social policy front, but I didn't hear anything convincing from him or his compatriots on the middle class jobs front.
Yeah.
And maybe we do have to rethink NAFTA.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I didn't want to interrupt you, but yeah, that's exactly right.
Maybe we do have to slow globalization's impact on some of these areas.
I would throw another thing out there. Rethinking NAFTA is an easy solution as these things go, because the president can do it himself. In fact, the president claims he's doing it now. We don't know what he's going to do, and I doubt it'll be any good. But it's worth remembering Obama promised to do that. Nobody remembers now. In 2008, when Obama beat Hillary in the primaries, that's one of the reasons that he came out and said, when I'm president, I'm going to, we have an escape clause in NAFTA, and I'm going to invoke that as soon as I'm president. The other thing that he used to beat Hillary in Iowa, this is completely forgotten. Nobody remembers this. Remember antitrust? The farmers are in the grip of these gigantic corporations. Well, we all are now, right? I mentioned Amazon earlier. It's like we're all in their grip, Google or Facebook or whatever. But the farmers are really in their grip. Whether you're talking about Monsanto or the local chicken, whatever, whoever the chicken processor is, it's dominant in your town or whatever. And Obama said, I'm going to, start enforcing antitrust again on these guys. And by the way, enforcing antitrust would mean going after Walmart. You ask what has destroyed the small town in rural Missouri and rural Kansas. Oh my God, it's Walmart, and a bunch of other factors too. But it's these gigantic, powerful corporations where we don't enforce the law on them. And that's, by the way, doesn't require an act of Congress to do. President can do it himself. If he wants. The law's on the books. The Sherman Antitrust Act. It was passed in the 1890s, folks, and it's still there. And all it takes is for him to. I used to back in about 3 years ago. I used to write op-ed or editorial after editorial, whatever you want to call it, essay after essay. Saying Barack Obama, please start enforcing antitrust again. And he didn't do it, and now I just feel like an idiot repeating this, but all he has to do is call his attorney general in and say, go get those guys. I mean, it'd be a little harder than that. He'd have to work really hard, have to win the cases and everything, but that would go a long way towards reinvigorating the heartland of this country. That would go a long way. And those are the easy things. Then you get into the bigger things. Well, we'll talk about that some other time. Thank you for your question. Two more. Okay,
Great.
Guys.
Hi there. A number of years ago in the Baffler, you published this hilarious and great piece about the problems within the music industry. And I'm curious, as a former punk rocker, what is your opinion about the current state of the industry and music culture writ large?
Well, of course, part of my problem with the music industry is that I stopped buying records in 1995. I said, I got so disgusted. So I lived in Chicago when this happened. And I really cared about music and about independent rock and about minor, independent labels and this sort of homemade subculture. I really, really, really cared about it. And after the success of Nirvana, there was this moment where every band in Chicago was basically offered a major label contract, and they all signed up. Yeah. And it just felt like this. I was on the losing side of a war that didn't mean anything to anyone anymore, and I was like, the hell with this. This is in 1995. It's like, I'm going to go out and write about organized labor instead. I've got a different losing war to get involved in, a different lost cause to sign up for. And so I stopped paying attention. And I'm really sorry about that. However, that said, I just said I was in Seattle and I went to this, they have a rock and roll museum there. Yeah. Or it used to be, it is a rock and roll museum. And they have a big exhibit about Nirvana. And this is the idea of the exhibit. The museum was built by Paul Allen, one of the Microsoft billionaires, and it sort of celebrates Seattle as a kind of post-industrial wonderland. And one of the ideas of this museum, at least in my interpretation of it, is that the sort of punk rock subculture that I was part of is a really excellent analogy for Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, all the sort of, yeah, I know, it's absolutely
So sorry.
stomach turning, but it's also, there's something really, really, really weird about seeing a record that you own behind a vitrine, or objects that anyhow, it's really strange, but that's sort of where my thinking goes. But like I say, I'm not up to date. Sorry. Apologies.
No, it's still a great answer. Thank you for your time.
I do think there's a religious response coming to Trump, but it's still in the burning stage, I think. But I'm on this medication, which is quite expensive, and just got on this coupon program with my provider. And I'm thinking of writing a letter to Pharma and Janssen, congratulating Donald Trump personally for having helped get this done, and just leaving out all their efforts completely and being completely obsequious in my praise of him to get this done, even though I'm not sure he had anything to do with it, although they might be worried that he might do something.
What did he do? I'm sorry, I've missed this. I've been out of town for a while.
He and Azar have proposed some kind of price controls on drugs, but my point is...
Really?
Something.
I didn't know that.
But the point is, the drug companies aren't sure what he'll do, as is anybody else about anything. And if I credit him personally with getting this done...
Oh, yeah, flattering.
And leave out all the economic jargon the drug company and Pharma sent me... I think that's a good way to approach it. Have a few laughs at him.
Yeah, you should do that. You should write that to him. I think that might work. I mean, that's what we know about narcissists is you flatter them, and this is. I love the way Macron, the president of France, all these international leaders are like, ooh, Donald Trump, ooh, but Macron was like, Donald, look at this parade, let's go have dinner on the Eiffel Tower, let's do all this fine stuff. And Trump is like, I get this guy, we're friends. And it might work.
And if I could just say one thing, we have this Veterans Day parade coming up in November, and trying to encapsulate the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, the 75th anniversary of the North Africa campaign, and Donald Trump all in one parade is going to be...
I hope he leads the parade. Wouldn't that be awesome?
I have an acquaintance who knows that the guy at the Pentagon who's planning this thing, he's working full time.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right. So, folks, okay, I'm not going to tell any... It is the 100th anniversary of World War I. And I'll tell you one last story. No, I won't. But 2 years ago, my daughter and I went to the 100th anniversary of the Somme. We went to the battlefield on the 100th anniversary. And it was really... sad. It was somber, and it was, never seen anything like it. 100 years ago, folks, that's where our world began. All right, so we have copies of this, and I brought my pen, and I'm ready to sign them, and it's a good book. You'll like it.